Today is Monday, January 18, 2021. It's Martin Luther King Day. My name is Lynn Lowin, and it is my honor and privilege today to interview Peter Lilienthal for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. Elissa Kaplan will be taking notes. We are on a Zoom, of course. And let's begin. Good afternoon, Peter.
Hi, Lynn. How are you?
Fine. So what do people call you?
Well, nowadays people call me Peter, but family and close friends call me Pete, and new friends call me Peter.
Okay. When were you born?
I was born on February 6, 1942.
And where were you born?
I was born in the Royal Hospital in the Bronx. That's on 161st Street in Grand Concourse, right near Yankee Stadium. Must admit, though, I've never really been a Yankee fan.
How did your family get to America, and what was the reason for their coming?
Well, my parents were born and raised in Vienna, and they actually were fortunate enough to escape right after the Anschluss of the Nazis annexing Austria on March 12, 1938. And they actually came over, fortunately, still in 1938. And they came over on the SS President Harding. And they left with my uncle Richard through Zurich and then Le Havre and Ellis Island. They were fortunate to escape Nazism and were able to survive.
Yes. Tell us about your grandparents.
Well, my paternal grandparents, who I knew, were both born in Hungary and wound up in Vienna. My grandmother's name was Regina Porras, and my grandfather, Adolf Lilienthal. My maternal grandparents were Rosa Wegweiser and Burl Gelbard. My maternal grandmother actually was my step grandmother. My mother's mother actually died when she was just 17 years old. She died of pneumonia, and her father actually then remarried, and coincidentally, his second wife's first name was the same as his first wife, and her name was Rosa. And they wound up living in Vienna and unfortunately wound up perishing in the Holocaust at Sobibor in 1942.
Can you talk a little about your parents? What did they do? Who were they?
Well, my paternal grandparents actually wound up meeting in Vienna. They both born in Hungary. They met in Vienna. My grandfather actually was a printer, a typesetter his entire life, and he was in training in Hungary, and was then seeking employment in Vienna, which many Jews actually moved to Vienna in the late 1800s, and he met his wife Regina, and she was also working in the same industry in Vienna, and they married. And they lived a very good life in Vienna, actually. Very poor section of Vienna, in Leopoldstadt, which was the poorest section of Vienna, but where all the Jews lived. And my maternal grandfather was born in Poland and came from a very academically trained family. His brothers and sisters were all professionals, either doctors or lawyers or whatever. And he didn't want to study anything, and was essentially kicked out of the house and on his way to Vienna, and married there. And he took up photography as one of his professions.
What about your parents? What did they do?
Well, listen, my father actually was a world-class athlete, a downhill ski champion, and great physical condition, and spent his life really in areas where he enjoyed the athleticism. He actually wound up becoming what they call a Turnverein leader. That's a gymnastics leader, and then wound up joining the Viennese fire department, the Feuerwehr. My mother actually wound up, after her mother died, moving in with her brother and sister-in-law, as they were then having a child, my cousin Ricky, who, by the way, now is 92. And she actually wound up babysitting a lot for my cousin when she was born and lived there. And my parents were actually were married in 1933, when my mother was 21 and my father was 30. So he was in the fire department and loved it, and really was a very caring person. It was never about him. It was always about what he could do for others. And that sticks with me all the time. And as someone who is really someone that I can always live up to or try to. And my mother too I had great parents, just terrific parents who did everything and embraced me. And very sadly, the year I was born, which was 1942, which was the year that her parents actually perished in Sobibor. And frankly, I know that my mother knew, and her sadness came through to me, even though I was a young child. And I remember that while they never talked about the Holocaust to me personally, about their involvement, their exposure to it, I felt that. And I remember having nightmares when I was a kid until I was 10 or 11. I remember having those nightmares, and I still remember what they were about. So while they never talked about it, and they always try to protect me, so to speak, it did have an impact on me.
What kind of Jewish life did you experience in your home when you were growing
I
up?
cannot hear you, Lynn.
I'm sorry, what kind of Jewish life did you experience in your home when you were growing up?
Having said what I just did about feeling Jewish, there's no question that there was a very strong Jewish heritage in my background. The fact that my parents had really close family in Vienna, and they talked about it a lot. As far as any formal Jewish education, I really didn't have any until it was time when my parents felt, you know what, maybe this kid ought to have a bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
And we wound up joining a synagogue, and I went to synagogue, and I learned from my Haftorah, and I did it for 5 years. But as far as having a Jewish home is concerned, we never had a Seder, and we never really lived an observant Jewish life at home. I mean, I know I was Jewish. Our whole family, we used to get together a lot of family gatherings. But as far as a Jewish home with Jewish observances, we did not have that.
You mentioned your bar mitzvah. What was it like?
Well, I will tell you that I frankly enjoyed it.
Good.
It was, I remember the day. In fact, I remember even the first few lines of my bar mitzvah, and I can still sing it. And I remember, when a bar mitzvah kid gets a lot of attention. And I have to admit that it didn't bother me one bit. And there was a lot of family and friends there. Many of my friends were not Jewish. And but despite the fact that they weren't, in fact, it was a good lesson for them too. And I found that it was just a fabulous experience. And I must say that there was lots of photographs taken, an album put together, and it's great to have that album because now people who are no longer here, I remember them at my bar mitzvah, and I remember them through my life until they were no longer with us. So it was a wonderful experience and something that was a great gift given to me.
Good. What kind of general education did you receive?
Well, a lot of it has to do with where we lived. we initially lived in until I was about 2 or 3. We lived in Manhattan, off Central Park West. In fact, I remember the address. It was 467 Central Park West. And the reason I remember that address is that I used to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. That's how I used to count, because of our address being 467, until I later learned that that wasn't correct. Then we moved to Sunnyside, Queens, where I went to grade school. And I experienced some anti-Semitism there. I used to get into fights, and we had neighbors across the street that were clearly anti-Semitic. And it got to a point when I was about 8 or 9 where my parents said, you know what, we can't live here anymore. And we moved to Jamaica, Queens, where I went to public school there too, until the 9th grade. And actually it was the 8th grade in those days. But the high school, my parents actually sent me to private school. And it was in Manhattan, the Franklin School. And I graduated there in 1959. And I then went to NYU Engineering in a program. It was a 5-year program where I could get 2 degrees, one in liberal arts and the other in metallurgical engineering. And that became my career. And I graduated in 1964.
Tell us about getting married and starting a family.
Well, I married my college sweetheart, Evie, who was cute as a button. And she also came from European background. Her parents were from Germany. And we got to know a lot about her family. Her grandmother was somebody I loved. Not that I didn't love my in-laws, but I loved my Evie's grandmother in particular, who was just a sweet, lovely, wonderful human being. And so we get married in 1964, right at the time of graduation. In fact, our parents did not even attend graduation because we were on our honeymoon. We drove cross country for 5 weeks. And my pitch to Evie was, you know what? We're not going to have time like this again soon. Let's take 5 weeks and drive across the country and see what it's about. And it was a wonderful experience. And we came back from our 5 weeks, and we wound up, I had a job in Connecticut at a company called Pratt & Whitney Aircraft as an engineer. And we lived in Hartford, and Evie actually was a teacher. She worked in a town nearby called Glastonbury.
And when were your children born?
Well, you know what? It didn't take very long. Our oldest son, so this is now, figure this is 1964. We moved to Hartford, Connecticut. And our oldest son, Stephen, was born on September 25th, 1966. And our younger son, Ryan, was born on August 31st, 1969. And we really enjoyed being in Hartford, Connecticut. We lived right near the Mark Twain Memorial. And what happened is that I enjoyed my job and everything else, but then I was offered an opportunity to teach at NYU in the engineering school, where I got an instructorship. And in 1966 or 7, we then moved to Manhattan, moved to Bayside, Queens, where I was able to commute from there to NYU, which is, the campus was in the Bronx, right off University Avenue.
When did you settle in Fairfield County?
Well, you know, it took a while. So here I am. I'm actually not only an instructor at NYU, but I was also going for my doctorate in engineering. And it got pretty tough income-wise, you know, having a couple of kids, paying the rent and so on. And I made a decision that, in fact, I really need to go out and try to find employment. which I did. I joined a company called Amex, American Metal Climax, with their headquarters that were in Manhattan at the time, and I commuted to Manhattan. And then they moved their headquarters to Greenwich, Connecticut. And when they did, we in fact moved to Greenwich, Connecticut when that happened. So that's how I got to Fairfield County.
Okay.
And we lived in Greenwich from about 1970, 71 until 2000.
What was your first job?
Sorry?
What was your first job?
So my first job actually was as an engineer at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft in Hartford, in East Hartford, actually. And then my second job was as an instructor at NYU. And my third job was working for Amex, which is where it got me to live in Fairfield County eventually, after they moved their headquarters to Greenwich, Connecticut. And I must say that I enjoyed all of my entire career. I was very fortunate. I had terrific people that I worked with, and I really enjoyed it a lot. So, but that's what got me to Fairfield County. And then I had tragedy in 2000, year 2000. Very, very, very tragically, Evie got sick, and she died of cancer on December the 13th. And a week later, my mother died. And I think we can all relate to how awful that could have been for me, and it was.
Absolutely.
And sometimes things happen and you can't do anything about it. So I had built this house in Greenwich. We loved the house. The kids grew up in that house. And here I am living in the house now at that point by myself. And sometimes things happen in a funny way. And we as Jews have learned a word called beshert. That means things happen and you don't know why until later. And I used to commute to, I should back up a little bit. I rushed up a bit. There was another job I had when I formed my own company. And that was in 1983, when Amex, the company where I actually became vice president strategic planning for this multi-billion-dollar company, they decided to move their headquarters to Colorado and offered me a great job. But I frankly couldn't leave the area. Our parents lived here and so on. And this was 1983. And I decided, you know what, with my strategic planning background and working with companies as I've done, I formed a company called Strategic Planning Services, which I ran for 30 years and retired in 2013. And it was a fabulous opportunity that I had many clients, and again, enjoyed that very much. But just sort of catching up to where I was before, in the year 2000, in my commute to New York, which I was doing, I would have to take a street in Greenwich called Glenville Road. And for those who hear this will know where that is. It's a very, very hilly road. And it had rained very heavily the night before. And I came over a rise in the road, and suddenly, but I hadn't seen it, a telephone pole fell across the road and I hit it.
Oh.
My car was a mess, but I was fine. But at the same time, when I was in college, my college roommate and best friend was dating this girl, Carol Sherman. And she and my roommate and Evie and I would double date, and we got to know each other pretty well. And Larry, in fact, continues to be a close friend. But in that rainstorm that hit me, Carol was living in Scarsdale at the time on Garth Road. And her car was parked under a tree, and a big limb hits her tree and really damaged her car. And she was working in Greenwich at the time and had her car at a body shop. And 2 days, about a week, I'm sorry, about a week later, she calls the body shop to find out the status of her car. And she hears over the loudspeaker through her phone that please move the Toyota so Mrs. Lilienthal can pick up her car. And lo and behold, she says, is that Evie Lilienthal? I said, yes, her husband was in a car accident. So she immediately goes to the Greenwich telephone book and finds out where we live. And Carol and Evie reconnected and they had breakfast together. And 8 weeks later, Evie was gone and she had passed away with a cancer that was virulent, but she was not in pain. And it goes to show you that, you just don't know. So here I am in the year 2000, and I just could not live in my house anymore. I mean, I'm living by myself. I had my own business. I was doing well, and I would enjoy during the day, but I'd come home. And after about 3 or 4 years, around the year 2004, I was finally able to sell my house. And by then, Carol and I started to spend a lot of time together, just as friends. And in fact, I forgot to mention something. Carol had told my best friend, Larry Spiegel, who lived in Dallas at the time, about what happened to Evie. And he called me and he said, he got on the phone, he cried uncontrollably. And I wound up consoling him. And I said, you know what, Larry, when the dust settles for you, call me and come to New York and we'll have a great time together. So several months passed by and he calls me and I said, Larry, is this the call? And he said, yes. So I said, listen, you're coming to New York and we'll have a great time together. But let me ask you a question. You're coming all the way here. Who else would you like to have dinner with one night or so? And who does he mention? But he mentions Carol. So it was Carol, Larry, and another dear friend, Lou Christie. And we had dinner at Centro's in Greenwich. And those are people who know Greenwich, know that where that is. And it was as though 45 years never happened. And we had a great time. So from that moment to the other part that I told you before about feeling very lonely, after a while, I just said, I got to do something. And Carol was a dear friend. I said, you know what? Why don't I ask her out for dinner or something? We can spend some time together. We started doing that. And with time, I realized how much I cared for her and how wonderful a person she is. And I said to myself, what am I wasting my life for? And I decided in February of 2005 to ask her to marry me. That day came, Valentine's Day. I had the ring and everything. And while we're getting ready to sit down for dinner, Carol's sister, Judy, calls and says, you know what, Dick and I were thinking, why don't we all go out for Valentine's Day tonight? I said, oh, please give me a break. So it had to wait a week. And then I gave Carol, a week later, I gave her the card. And she read the card. And I said, you didn't read the last line. And then she finally did. And she said yes. And I gave her the ring. So it was a very moving moment. And so we were looking for a place to live in Stamford, having sold the house. And we moved into the house in March of 2005. And we've been living in Stamford ever since.
That's quite a story.
Lucky story on one, sad, very sad on one
Very
hand,
sad. And
lucky on the other.
Can you tell us something about your community involvement?
Well, I've always felt a very strong tie to community, even when I was growing up. I was very much involved with Boy Scouting, and it turned out that my scoutmaster was terrific. He was my father. And while he was my father, he didn't at all treat me different from anybody else. And we had a troop that was huge. We had 60 kids in the troop. Can you imagine? In those days, it was fabulous.
Yeah.
And I realized how community and family and in many ways and relationships and everything else that goes on, the community is a very important aspect of my life. And when we moved to Greenwich, I became active in the Anti-Defamation League and actually chaired the local chapter, and also became involved in the Israeli bond drive and was co-chair of that, and got to know a lot of people in the community and how wonderful they were. And I really felt a very strong bond to the idea of what community can mean. So moving to Stanford, it turns out that, you know what, another community, but you know what, a very wonderful, active community, Stanford's Jewish community is. And I became active there too. Carol was actually on the board of Federation. And when she left the board, they asked if I could, in fact, join. I said, be happy to do that. And I was asked to be the chair of the Yom HaShoah commemorations in 2 consecutive times. And I really enjoyed that quite a bit. And actually at one point, and I'm sort of ending my term now as the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Federation. Also a very wonderful thing to do. And other organizations I belong to are the Interfaith Council. And I am also a mentor to an inner city child who is now a freshman at Westfield High School.
Previously, you mentioned some anti-Semitism that you experienced as a child. Do you want to talk about that anymore?
Well, the thing is that it was very upsetting to my parents what I was experiencing, considering what they'd been through. How does this happen in America? And they realized that we could no longer live where we did. And then we did move. And it's unfortunate. Anti-Semitism is a big deal, and it's getting worse all the time. And it's a very, very tragic thing that's going on in this country at this time. So, but that experience was devastating to me, and I can't imagine what it meant to my parents. For them to go through what they did, come to this country, and then their kid is experiencing anti-Semitism here. It was something that was shocking to them. And soon after that, we moved to another part of Queens, in Jamaica, Queens.
Did being Jewish ever help you in any way?
Well, the thing is that I think I'm a very big believer in community, as perhaps you could tell through all of this. And it turned out the community that I very much felt comfortable with was, in fact, the Jewish community. But then I realized that there are other communities out there that are also terrific. And in being involved with the Interfaith Council, which it was just a wonderful thing. And I've been pretty active with that. And I don't know that it really has to do with being Jewish per se, except the Jewish community was very welcoming and lovely and wonderful and embracing. And obviously now being involved with the Jewish Historical Society here in Fairfield County, we have a wonderful organization. And Elissa, who's our president, is doing a phenomenal job every year becoming more relevant to the community. And I've learned a lot from the people that are there. And it's been a very important experience for me. So if you ask the question, is being Jewish helped in any way? It certainly provided a home for me to enjoy who I am and to be able to give back. And from that standpoint, I would say yes.
What wars did you live through, and how did they affect your life?
Well, we've mentioned that I was born in 1942, where the Second World War was going on. The fact that I was born in this country is a result of World War II and what my parents had to endure to get here. The impact of the war really was more of what I said before about actually feeling the pain of what my mother had when she lost her parents. So the experience of that war really came as a result of stories that I heard. I lost the first cousin at Auschwitz. I lost my grandparents at Sobibor. The brother who is now my first cousin, who is my first cousin, I've become very close with, he's now 92 years old. It was his brother who was lost at Auschwitz. And his first mother, the mother of that cousin, his name was Otto Lilienthal. His mother also perished at Auschwitz at another time. So these stories have really become very, very pronounced to me. And the story that I hear from my cousin Fred, who's in Florida, Alfred, who's 92, tells me the story of when he was 10 or 11 years old in Vienna. He gets stuck in Vienna during the war because his father, who had been able to come to this country, my uncle, who came over to this country with my parents, was able to earn enough money to have his wife and 2 kids come over. And he sent the tickets. And at that time, my cousin Alfred became 10. And the ticket he got was for a child, and a 10-year-old needed an adult ticket. And he couldn't get out. His brother did. His brother Kurt got out, but he couldn't get out because his brother Herbie could get out, but he could not. And when he finally got a ticket where he could have gone, the war broke out in Europe, and all ways out were lost. So he winds up getting stuck in Vienna with his grandparents there. And he tells the story of when he was 10 years old, of his grandmother filling up a bag of groceries for him to deliver to my grandparents, my mother's parents, in Vienna. And he went with those groceries, and they were hiding in an apartment in Vienna. At that time, it has to be 1938 or 1939 or 40. And he goes to their apartment and knocks on the door, and they didn't answer because the Gestapo was feared. Is that the Gestapo? Well, here a 10-year-old boy says, "Grandma, Grandpa, it's me." They realize this kid is there, and they come, and he's there with the groceries, and they immediately broke down crying with the kind gesture that was given for them to get food. And as they're unloading the grocery bag, he walks down the hall and notices an opening to the apartment. And there were 2 other Jewish families in that apartment that were separated by blankets hung on clotheslines. And it really struck him. And then he goes down, and my grandfather goes with him. And of course, at that time, he had to wear a coat that had Judah, Jewish star on it. And he embraces him as he's getting ready to get on the trolley car. And a Nazi passes by observing that incident. And my grandfather was able to get back into the apartment building, but the Nazi gets on the trolley car and in the front, and he gets in the back, and he tried to get to him fortunately it was too crowded. And my cousin was able to escape at the next stop, and he knew the building across the way from that stop, that if you went in the front, you could go through the building and get away in the back, and he was able to get away. But that's a story. That's a story from Second World War that happened to my family, to somebody who I love, the people I love, and fortunately gotten to know still. So yeah, that's World War II. And then Korean War in 53. I was all of 11 years old. And it turns out that my cousin Fred, who I just spoke about, he lost his brother in that war, Herbie. And well, it's not me personally directly, but it is me. It's my family. It's the impact, the emotional impact of losing part of your family that way. And we talk about it. We do talk about it all the time, even though now it's 2021. This was 1953. It's like yesterday. And of course, then the Vietnam War. And, I was of draft age, and fortunately, I was working in a position that was draft deferrable, or not draft. I wasn't eligible for the draft per se. In fact, I did get a draft notice on my birthday, and I was able to send them my occupation, and I was not asked to join. I got draft notice and a physical date and so on. I didn't do that. But I have a cousin who served in Vietnam, and he only recently has started to talk about it. Look, you know what? We have somebody here who knows war very well, and it's all a tragedy. And my cousin did experience some. In fact, he served in Vietnam and was exposed to Agent Orange, and suffers from neuropathy as a result, and has a very tough time walking.
Well, let us leave war and go to a lighter note. What did you do with your spare time? What do you do with your spare time? How do you have fun?
Well, fortunately, I've got a wonderful family. Both my sons are terrific. Stephen, he's now 54. Believe it or not. How can you be 54? I can't believe I have a son that's 54. And we visit quite a bit. He owns a bicycle tour company, and he's never been married, has had lots of potential, but never been married. He owns a bicycle tour company and runs tours all over the place. And whenever I can help, I'd like to be staff, which I am. And he's written a terrific book. He's a real revolutionary, knowledgeable person. Has written a book on revolutionary battles and gives talks. And my younger son, Ryan, is now 51, has 3 kids himself. And they're terrific kids. And they love to do all kinds of stuff. The oldest is, believe it or not, he's 20. He's a junior at Wesleyan. His younger brother is 18 and is applying to college. And then they have this 12-year-old who's a wild man and who's terrific. So besides the biking that I love to do and the skiing that I love to do and the visiting of family and doing the stuff that we talked about, being involved in the community is stuff that I enjoy, and being a mentor is, all of it takes a very good, wonderful part of time. And I never really look for things to do because there's always more on the plate than really one has time for.
What inventions did you live to see, and which ones are the most amazing to you?
Well, we're experiencing it. This whole business of technology, the whole business of computer. I mean, it's changed the world. And somehow you can't do anything of any significance without having to touch this technology. Look, we're doing this on Zoom now. And when I ran my company, I couldn't have run it myself. I had a staff, but I couldn't have run it myself without computer technology. And every aspect of what goes on in the world today somehow is touched by that. I'm sure we could find other really terrific things and inventions that have taken place, but I can't imagine any invention that's had as huge an impact as the computer technology has, and it continues to grow every day. And we know most of the applications are just positive. And of course, whenever there's some of that, there's other crap that goes on, which takes place. But it is what it is. And I can't imagine an invention that has impacted the world as much as that.
Do you want to tell us anything about your children or grandchildren? Want to fell?
Yeah, right. Well, as a grandparent, it's really not about us. It's always about them. And if you can figure out a way to enjoy what's important to them and to do it with them, that's terrific. And so our oldest grandchild, Noah, who's at Wesleyan, is really a world-class tennis player. He's a ranked tennis player. And we try to go to as many matches as we can to see him play. But he's also a very accomplished jazz musician. He composes music, has a group up at Wesleyan, and they do gigs. And so, it's not hard to be involved with that stuff and that you're there enjoying that. His younger brother, Evan, is in theater. And since he's been, I think, about 12 or 13 years old, has been acting. And he and his girlfriend, Angela, have formed a theater company. And when he had his bar mitzvah, actually, Carol and I promised him that we would take him to 5 Broadway shows.
Wow.
And spend time with him doing that. The number is not 5, it's 20. And we've been able to enjoy the things that he enjoys, doing his kind of stuff. And with the little one, Jacob, he loves biking. And I've been going down there during the summer, actually, every week, and we go on a bike trip together with his father and sometimes his mother. And we'd enjoy that kind of time together. He also loves baseball. He is a big-time Yankee fan. And I tell him how I don't hate the Yankees anymore, but I've taken him to Yankee games, and we enjoy that. So, you do the things that they like to do, and it's not hard because they do stuff which is very enjoyable.
Well, now, do you have any advice to give for future generations?
Well, the thing is, I've thought about this for a long time. And in fact, when Evie passed away, my boys came to me and asked me what I thought was important in life, I really was taken back by it. And, what do you know? It's what do you say? And I had to think a bit, and it became apparent to me that if they could find 2 or 3 really good relationships in their life, they would have a good life. And it's about relationships, I've always felt.
Do you have anything else that you would like to add to your story? It's been interesting.
Well, the thing is, the only thing I can add to my story is that I consider myself as lucky as anybody could be. I have wonderful friends. I have wonderful family. I'm enjoying stuff that I do. And, you try to do the best you can with what you got. And hopefully that turns out to be a good thing. And in final analysis, I can't help to think, but so far it's been a good thing. And if I continue doing it, how bad could that be, right?
That's right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Lynn, very much. And the Jewish Historical Society. It was a great thing. I enjoyed that very much.